Good morning. Welcome. Well, it is 9:01 on my clock, so I do expect that we will have some more folks join us as they're able to step in from other meetings. But I just want to welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Lori Zimmerman, the Director of Professional Learning with MASA, and I am so happy to welcome Nan and John today. We had the good fortune of having a lot of excellent breakout sessions proposed for our spring conference. And while we weren't able to host all of them there, we are excited to host some of them virtually in this way. So appreciate their flexibility in altering the presentation to be one that could be offered virtually instead of in person. So Nan and John, I will turn it over to you to introduce yourselves and your topic.
Sounds good. My name's Leotawa Dr. John Peterson, and I work with the Minnesota Education Equity Partnership. I am there as their senior fellow and director of policy. I've been an educator since 1999. I was a teacher for 7 years and an administrator for a little over 10 years, mostly in St. Paul public schools and Minneapolis public schools. And yeah, lifelong educator. Both my parents were teachers. So it's just a part of who I am. It's a part of my lifestyle, as I like to tell people. Nan?
So good morning, everyone. I'm Nan Yurecko, and I was in K-12 systems for almost 30 years. And for the last, I don't know, has it been 5 or 6 years now, John? Been fortunate to stay engaged in this work through MnEEP. And so I support our equity training. We have a center and some institutes, and so just grateful to be a part of the work. So thanks for being here this morning. Um, in, I think it was the end of 2023, MnEEP published a report. And so if you're not familiar, every so many years, MnEEP has historically produced a state of the students of color and American Indian students, right? And shared just how are we doing as a state in meeting the needs of each of the learners in our systems. And so we worked on the report, but when we did it this time, it was done a little bit differently. And the reason for that was because, we said, we all know the data, and we have a ton of evidence that our students of color and American Indian students continue to be underserved in our systems. And so instead of just kind of regurgitating the data and putting it in the report, we're going to take a different approach and help people discover some tools and some things that may actually be helpful in creating systems change. So that's kind of how we got to this point. This morning, we're going to give you the opportunity to dive specifically into one of the case studies. But before we do that, I'm going to just give you a little bit more background information so you kind of know what drove the report and how it's organized. So do we have the PowerPoint up? Because I'm not seeing it right now.
You all
Awesome.
see this? I'll go to slideshow.
Yes, I can see it now. Great. Can you go back to the second slide?
Yep.
So one of the first things we wanted to communicate through the report was right there, John, is that we really want to focus on systems change and not so much transformative change. That word, like words in our profession tend to become buzzwords. They tend to become overused. We don't have shared meaning around them. And so we really wanted to emphasize, one, this is about creating sustainable change, because people in our systems are working really hard to advance things and make improvements for students and families. And it's not getting the results that we ideally want. And so there's a difference between just systems change and really creating sustainable change. And then the other thing that we wanted to really lift up is this idea that this is about fixing the system that was never designed to serve all students. That's not why it was created. It's not how it has been structured. And that this is not about fixing children or even our educators, right? This isn't about fixing people, it's about fixing systems. So John, if you can go to the next slide.
Sure.
So the overarching umbrella, can you click it one more time?
You bet.
Sorry. The overarching umbrella for the report is anchored in culturally validating pedagogy and leadership. And so we always start with, well, what do we mean by culture, right? Because we all have a different frame of reference and different lived experiences and, different ways we've been socialized and our identities. And so how I think about culture may be different than somebody else. So John, can you click it again? And so we've really adopted this definition from Dr. Eric Buffalohead because it's easy to explain and everyone can see themselves in it, right? Sometimes people who identify as white, like me, think, oh, well, culture is something other people of color have or people of other ethnicities. And actually, culture as human beings is something that we all have because it's just simply our ways of knowing and being. We all have things, we all think things, and we all do things. So that's what we mean by culture. John, can you click again? Next slide. So we say culturally validating pedagogy and leadership, and we're very intentional about that. So this body of work is really, it honors the work of Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings and Dr. Geneva Gay, who really provided the foundation around introducing our profession to this idea of culturally responsive teaching and instruction. However, we're intentional about using the word validate in pedagogy and leadership because you can be responsive without being validating. And so we intentionally make that distinction. All right, John, next slide. So what do we mean by culturally validating pedagogy and leadership? This is a shift. It's a shift in epistemology. Historically, our systems have been doing their work based on a banking theory where kids come to us, they're these empty containers, they don't know anything, and we have to, as the educators, deposit into them. And this is a shift, right? So if we think about our ways of knowing and being, it's an indigenous epistemology that says, all of the knowledge that is, has been, or ever will be already exists. It's already here. And that our approach to teaching and learning and leadership is really a drawing out of that brilliance. Because we know, especially our children come to us with tons of knowledge. It's just that the system doesn't necessarily honor it, inquire about it, or acknowledge it. So this is a little bit of a shift. And then next slide, just what do we mean by pedagogy? And John, click a couple times. Is we just mean content, instruction, and environment. And you notice the circles are not the same size, and that's intentional because historically, our profession tends to focus a lot on content and instruction, and we never get out to the macro environment, whether that's in the classroom or the environment and the culture in our schools and in our districts. And so that's what we mean by pedagogy. So those kind of key ideas set the foundation for the State of Students of Color report. And so, John, if you can go to the next slide. So we decided to take some of the tools that we have around culturally validating pedagogy and leadership and apply them to the report. And so the outcome is we have one executive summary that you're actually going to see today, but then each of the report outlines 5 case studies. And so each of the case studies also have a more extensive description and explanation, so you can access it kind of either way. And then in addition, we started with the world's best workforce. Kind of how is Minnesota doing in achieving those the goals that are outlined in world's best workforce and that legislation. And then each of the case study kind of builds on that. So next slide, John. We used a different research methodology to do the reports. And it's really a mixed methods approach because typically research focuses on the quantitative, right? And we know quantitative is really important in our work and in our profession. And at the same time, the quantitative doesn't tell the whole story. I know yesterday I gave an example about how one of the quantitative measures we use are graduation rates. Well, we have students of color and American Indian students who are graduating from high school, and they're being tracked directly into remedial courses at community colleges. And they do not have the resources to spend extra time and money participating in courses that they're not getting college credit for, right? It's a waste of everybody's time. And so just because they graduated doesn't mean that they weren't underserved and we didn't help them reach proficiency in reading and math, even though we have this quantitative measure that they were a high school graduate. So that's just an example of, the quantitative doesn't tell the whole story. So next slide. So one of the tools that you're going to see when you look at this case study today is how these, how they're organized. So they're organized around one of our tools called the 3 C's of change. And the idea with the 3 C's of change is you start with consciousness, right? And typically we do this in our profession. We build some consciousness around something. We say, hey, we've got this data. This presents a problem or some inequities. And then we start to address it. Then you go to C2 or the second circle, which is conviction. And what we mean by that is, morals, beliefs, values. What are the mental models that are at work? And then finally, the third C is commitment. And that's where that moves us to action that impacts the lived experiences of POSI and American Indian students. So I'm just going to break these down real quickly. And then we'll dive into the case study. But we have 5 critical elements when we talk about consciousness. And this is where we think this is expansive to probably how we've been able to do our work in systems before. So again, it's expanding to include qualitative data instead of being so quantitatively focused. And then we also want to include the personal, right? Drilling down to each student. We want to be able to actually understand a student's personal lived experience and be able to see their face, right? So not just behavior data, for example, but really what is, Anthony's experience around behavior so that we can actually serve students more effectively and efficiently. And then we isolate race, and all of students' other social and cultural identities, because we understand that, race isn't our only identity. It's one of them, and there are intersections with other things. And my identity shapes my frame of reference and how I lead and what I bring and contribute to the work. And I also have to be able to understand that my frame of reference isn't the same as everybody else's. So we have to be able to expand that and understand that, especially our post-Science American Indian students are coming from different frames of reference. Culturally validating pedagogy and leadership is really about honoring, valuing, and having all parts of that identity contribute to the learning process rather than forcing students to assimilate. And then multiple perspectives, of course. I know, in like principal school and leadership trainings, everybody says, oh, go find all your believers, right? And get them moving. They're on the bus already and start going, and then everybody else will come. Well, that doesn't necessarily work. And it also limits my consciousness, because actually if we're going to shift mental models, which is necessary in order to create sustainable change, I have to know what other perspectives that are different than mine, where they're coming from, what mental models are associated with those perspectives, so that my job as a leader really can be get everybody moving in the same direction. And even though we may differ in how we get there or some of our approaches, if I can identify within those differences of value that we both share, then that is going to help give us something to collectively anchor the work in. So understanding multiple perspectives, super important. Then C2, like I said, I already explained this. It's, beliefs, morals, values, and mental models. But I'm going to show you in a next slide a common leadership trap that we run into around mental models. And then C3 is action. So John, will you just go to the next one more slide? Okay. So here's a common leadership trap that we run into. In our model with the 3 C's of change, we think it's really important, one, to expand our consciousness so that it includes all of those 5 elements so that our data set is much more comprehensive. Then, based on that, we need to also look at mental models, because what typically happens is on the right side of the screen. As leaders in our systems, we jump from consciousness, which isn't fully flushed out and very well developed. We may have some data, but it's not comprehensive. And then based on that, we jump right to commitments. And then we either don't get the results or the change is not sustainable. And part of that, we believe, is because we've skipped a step. So if you think about our definition of culture, we can apply it to the 3 C's. So consciousness would be my haves. What things do we have? Conviction would be the things we think. And then our commitments would be the things we do. And so what I think also informs what I do. And so if we don't shift mental models, we can't reach sustainable change. So for example, like I always use the example about 8th grade algebra, right? With really good intentions, we had some data around the fact that not all students had access to algebra at 8th grade. And so then a commitment was made by the state to say, okay, we're going to open up that access. Everybody's going to have the opportunity. But conviction was skipped. So we didn't look at what are the mental models that teachers have around opening up access to algebra. So if I'm used to serving a certain group of students and now other students are coming in and my mental models around that are that they maybe don't have the capacity or the background to achieve in algebra, then that's going to impact the outcomes for students. So if I haven't provided training um, both around content and instruction and in mental models and explored our beliefs around how do we feel now, how does algebra need to look differently at our school, then I'm not going to get the intended results. So so that's one of the shifts we're trying to make.
Oops, sorry about that.
So are there any questions about that? Those are just kind of the big ideas that I wanted to share, just so you have some context before you head into the case studies. Anybody?
I have a question, Nan. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit, or I suppose we both could talk a little bit, but what your thoughts are on how you define what constitutes a mental model.
Yeah. So, and John, you can chime in. But mental models are tools, and they can be helpful, right? Because they can help our brains sort and classify information. It helps make things more efficient for us. But mental models also, based on all the information that we're bombarded with unconsciously, they can also work very quickly and help us jump to bias and assumptions, right? And so part of this process is really slowing down, and the system is very fast paced, it's time bound. And so we just want to kind of slow things down and really dive into data and then say, okay, what's at work here? Because oftentimes we'll say we believe this, but then our practices or our actions are over here. There's a disconnect. And so we want to make sure that what we're intending is actually playing out for students. And so in order to do that, we have to examine some of the mental models that are at play as we do our work. The other
Thank
thing that
you.
I just want to acknowledge really quick, and Lori, I'm being intentional about this because you were so smart to ask this question yesterday, and I really appreciated it, is that, we do also really want to acknowledge that, the political climate has shifted nationally. That impacts us. And we understand that, all as an organization, we make a choice to isolate race, and our work focuses on each student in Minnesota, and particularly students of color and Indigenous students. The reality is we know people are in places where they can't say race. And right now, just, DEI, the words diversity, equity, inclusion, are also under attack. And yesterday, I just talked to somebody who said, I was going into a district to share some information, and they wouldn't let me use the word belonging. Even that word had become, I guess, a not okay word. And so that's why we just really think you don't even have to say culture. You can just get people organized and anchored around what are the things we have, think, and do in our work for students. What are the things we want to have? What are the things we want to think? What are the things we want to do? It can be as simple as that, so that it doesn't have to be, dangerous work for you. Sometimes we make it too complex.
But Nam, this is Deb Henton. I'm going to jump in and say it's at the heart of our work to make sure that everybody belongs and that we meet every student. So deviating from that is not an option. And we just have to find different language. I was just in an AMSD meeting this morning, the Association for Metropolitan School Districts, in which we talked about language and how important it is. And some pretty high profile committees are changing their names, going away from DEI, calling them access and opportunity committees, whatever, but the work continues. We just have to make sure
Yes.
that stays in place.
Yes, absolutely. We just have to find the workaround. Thanks for that, Deb.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. So let's jump in.
Thank you, Nan. Appreciate that. You know, it's always amazing to see you present such a comprehensive set of tools and ideas and framework in such a short amount of time. You're a professional at this, and I just appreciate the opportunity to co-present with you. I'm going to share my screen. I think you have a link in the chat to the full report from 2023. We call it the State of Students of Color American Indian Report. But I'm going to share my screen here because I want to give folks just a little bit of a orientation to the document. As Nan mentioned, there have been prior versions of this report that go back. I think the first one was in 2001, and there have been subsequently 5 total that have been produced by MnEEP. The Minnesota Education Equity Partnership has had a long-standing table called the Research Collaborative Table, also known as the RCT. A lot of folks probably aren't aware, but MnEEP actually does original research. And we have guiding research principles that we use to guide the work of the RCT that has been in existence, I think, for at least 20 years, if not a little bit longer. And so the work of the RCT is how this document was produced under the leadership of Dr. Rev Hillstrom, who is the former director of research, senior director of research for MnEEP. And so as you dig into the report, you'll get a chance to see that there were many different folks that helped to co-write this report. It wasn't written by just 1 or 2 different people. We broke it off into primary investigators, contributing authors. We had a research intern, we had editors, and then an executive summary team that put this together. Table of contents wise, you've got an introduction. There's a piece called New Ways to Solve Problems, which introduces the notions of culturally validating pedagogy and leadership as an entire framework within which there are multiple tools. As Nan mentioned, we have the research methodology for case studies. We've got a piece on that. And then we've got 5 distinct case studies that fall into these 5 different categories. The first, I would say, 3 relate to K-12, and the final 2 relate more specifically to higher education. There's a conclusion, and then we have some references. This introduction was written by former House Representative Carlos Mariani Rosa, who was in the House for 32 years. He is our executive director at MnEEP, and he wrote this introduction, which is really a nice kind of segue into the model of CVPL, is what we call as an acronym, Culturally Validating Pedagogy and Leadership. And so what you'll see in this first couple pages of the report are different tools that can be used to apply to how you work as an educational leader. You can see we have the 3 C's of change tool here, and Nan talked about consciousness, conviction, and commitment. And so we would love an opportunity to talk about some of these other tools at a later date with you all. This is the research methodology for the case studies. Nan mentioned that there was an intentionality around providing a mixed methodological approach. The quantitative is obviously an important part of K-12 education. Unfortunately, the qualitative sometimes is short-shrifted, and so we really wanted to put emphasis on the ethnographic, or the stories and uncovering of those stories from educators, learners, folks within the field, and to hear their experiences and how they have experienced education. At MnEEP, we have 5 big, bold goal areas. And so we oriented the report around those goal areas. Really what you're experiencing today is a part of what we call BBG1, which is around culturally validating pedagogy and leadership training and support through our Race Equity Training Center, which Nan leads as the director. And so know that we're focusing just on one of the 5 kind of pie pieces, I guess would be the best. I'm thinking of Trivial Pursuit as I look at this, but we have student voice, teacher diversity, higher education, developmental education, and higher education success. So this is the first case study. It's called Educational Equity Leadership Development, Minnesota Education Equity Partnership, Superintendent Race Equity Leadership Network. You know, Nan and I, we met a couple days ago just to talk about the presentation, and I know we had promoted this as multiple case studies, and we thought, you know, given the breadth of these case studies, we thought it would be probably most appropriate to focus on one for today and go a little bit deeper in our breakout groups. And so what we're going to have you do is you're going to break out into groups of, how many folks do we have in the group here, Dave? Do we have two? Or not for two?
There should be enough for 2 groups of 4, yes.
Perfect. So what we'll do is we're going to put you into 2 groups of 4, and we're going to do what I used to call a jigsaw when I was a social studies teacher. So you remember, as a social studies teacher, I would give a big packet of information. I'd say, all right, you guys are going to jigsaw this. What does that mean? Well, each of you are going to pick one piece of the puzzle, the report, this case study, and you're going to focus on that and that part. So in your group of 4, I'd like one person to focus on C1 and read C1. I'd like one person to focus on C2, which is on conviction, oftentimes the one part of the 3 C's that is skipped. And then I would like 2 folks to split up C3, which is commitment, and then the call to advance, which includes both a finding and an action step. All right, so the 4 people in your group, you're going to each read a specific part. C3 is going to be split between 2 people. What we would like you to do is we'd like you to work the process of the 3 C's of change and talk and have conversation about what you read. 2 things that we'd like you to consider. What are you noticing about what you read, right? And so we're going to do some metacognition here, but then also, what are you wondering about? All right, we tend to lean in quite a bit to Charlotte Danielson's framework as we think about working with adults and doing adult learning at MnEEP. And I'm a big fan of noticing and wondering. When I used to go into classrooms and as an administrator and do teacher observations, I would always give feedback, like initial feedback, you know, real-time feedback. This is what I'm noticing while I watch you deliver this lesson plan. And this is something that I'm wondering about. And that would come back into the formal observation conversation, and we'd start to build knowledge and a collective wisdom based on those noticings and wonderings. So we're going to break you off into those groups, those 2 groups of 4 each. You're going to jigsaw this, and then when we come back, we'll have just a little bit of time to talk about what you discussed and what you learned as a group. It won't be a formal report out, but again, we're looking for what did you notice, or what were you noticing as you were learning, and what were you, or are you still wondering about? All right, so any questions with that as we move to the next phase of our presentation here today?
Okay, everyone's back now.
All right, thank you, Dave. Appreciate your support and help with this. Well, hope everyone had a good conversation. I know it's too brief. You know, I do trainings across the state, Nan does as well. And one of the consistent pieces of feedback we receive is that people, one, love to be in community and conversation with one another. And then there's also never enough time. You know, there's not enough time to build that community-based knowledge. So we are going to hear from you all, folks, from in just a second. But I wanted to share this statement here from MnEEP, which is as true today as it was a year ago. We are still very much committed to the work that we've been doing for the last, I think 30 years or so here, maybe even a little bit longer at MnEEP. MnEEP transforms system structures and public narratives to advance race equity and excellence in education. We envision a racially just society in which each student achieves their full potential. Together, we can build equitable education spaces that uplift and empower Minnesota's people of color and Indigenous students and advance racial equity and excellence in education. Because that's really what it's about. It's about excellence for our children and for our students. So, well, I am very curious. I know we only have about 9 minutes left, and we'd like to do a quick little closing, but I guess I'm going to be honest with you. I am interested in the content of what you talked about, but I'm equally, maybe even more interested in how you processed through the conversation. So what was something you noticed about the process? And Nan and I were talking, Deb Hintz, or not Deb Hintz, but Sue Hintz. Some of you may know Sue as a former educational leader here in Minnesota. She always talked about content and process. What did you notice about the process? What did you notice about the content? So if I could have just a volunteer or a couple of volunteers talk a little bit about what they noticed as they were having their conversation just now. And don't be shy.
Well, actually, I will say, Dr. John, that we did introductions first, and then we did our reading, and then we were just debriefing. So we really didn't have much of a process other than 1, 2, 3, and we were just in 3. So a lot of, head nodding, and we're like-minded people, I believe. And so the discussion was really just centered on sharing with others what we had read.
Sounds good. So as it relates to C1 being consciousness, what was something that folks noticed about consciousness as they were reading the case study?
That we need more superintendents and school board members who are the leaders of districts to have more training, to understand the process, and I'm going to venture out and say more people of color.
Thank you for that. Is your name pronounced Dina?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. How about C2? One that it's one of the C's, 3 C's of change that is oftentimes skipped over, conviction.
I don't think we can skip that one over. I did the reading on that one, and it was clear that if leaders are going to make systemic change, they need to also have professional development. And a number of our leaders are saying, the overwhelming are saying that they are not ready to center race in their systems without professional development.
And support from the legislature for that type of professional development.
Yeah, we will. Yep.
Personal investment is one thing. Legislative investment in the personal investment and professional development of educators and leaders is critically important. I know that has been a topic that's been brought up even last session, including this session. So yeah, that conviction really is a lot of personal investment. What does it take for me to not only be passionate, but to invest? And then the third C, I think, is commitment, if I'm not mistaken, right? 3 C's of change. What bubbled up as it related to commitment with respect to this case study?
I focused on the specific goals section of the commitment reading, and what the couple pieces that really stood out to me of that one was, really focusing on the courageous leadership in that, and also the building the cross district partnerships of the metro in the rural with superintendents, and the importance of building those relationships and partnerships between the districts. I thought those goals were that stood out to me in the reading. We didn't have much of a chance to get to that part. We were just starting that conversation in our group, but.
Sounds good, Nicole. Thank you for that. Good to see you again.
You too, Jeff.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, the relationships are critically important as you think about the geography and where districts are located. Some folks are in the metro, some folks are in the exurban, some folks are in rural Minnesota, greater Minnesota. Having time to have those conversations is important. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and it was very intentional that the network was organized that way, because like many things in our profession, groups of individuals or programs are pitted against each other, right? They're always set up in this binary. It's either this program or this program. It's either this group of kids or this group of kids. And the same thing happens to districts and superintendents. It's rural, and it's typically around resources, rural versus, metro or suburban. And so it was like, and that part of that is intentional around the system to isolate us in our work. And we need to, it needs to be a coalition where we're working more collaboratively, because it may look a little bit different based on our context, but we usually all have the same needs and challenges. So that was really intentional.
Yeah, Nan was the lead for the SREL network and also was the primary investigator and editor too for the case studies, but primary investigator for case study 1. So it's great to have you here today, Nan, to speak from that perspective. I want to share just a little piece of something that I shared with Dave and Nan when you all were in the breakout rooms. MnEEP has a bit of an arc in terms of how it does its work. We do original research. We formulate networks that are oftentimes statewide. We convene through those networks and we build policy advocacy agendas from the research through the network and as a part of those convenings. And so 6 years ago, when we developed, say, for example, the proposal to provide for administrative rulemaking authority to the Board of School Administrators to create an opportunity for administrators to get professional development in the area of culturally validating pedagogy, that's a part of our policy agenda. It comes from the research that you're reading and that you read today in these case studies. I'd really encourage you, before we wrap, I'll give Nan the last word here. I'd really encourage you to download the PDF of the report. These case studies were designed to be applicable to the praxis of leadership and learning. And the more that you practice and work with the tools like the 3 C's of change, the better you'll be able to process through and critically analyze how to discern, well, this is what we learned here in the case study. Here's how we can apply that learning to a real-time problem that we're needing solutions for in your school and or district. So I really look at the case studies as learning tools, right? Opportunities to have conversation, get into relationship, and start to think about how to problem solve in new and different ways using tools like the 3 C's of change. Nan, you want to close us out?
Sure. Just thanks to MASA for giving us the opportunity to just connect. Like that's what our work is anchored in, is just connecting with people and schools and at their organizations. And so thanks for that. And thanks to the rest of you for joining us. Please reach out, MnEEP.org and is the website. And then John and I can also be reached. It's just our first initial last name at MnEEP.org. So we'd love to hear from you. If there are challenges you're facing and we can help support in any way, we're very willing to do that. So yeah. So
Well,
thanks.
Nan and John, we're so grateful to you. Dave, thank you for facilitating the technology. Nice to meet you, Dina. Beth, always good to see you. And to meet Beth Ann as well. I will say to those of you that don't know this, MnEEP is just a phenomenal resource. We are so grateful to their assistance and help when this new administration came on and our districts were worried about immigration enforcement visits by ICE. And we continue to stay in connection with regard to watching what happens with the new administrative direction. So I'm really grateful for our partnership. John and I and Valerie Doslin, our lobbyist, always meet and talk about what our agendas are for the political session. So we will continue to do that. And with that, my phone is ringing, so I'm going to have to sign off. But have a good Easter break, everyone.
You as well. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.